Hello, and thank you for joining us today. South Asia, a population of 2 billion people, but accounts for 2/5 of the world's poor. To be fair, it has seen high growth. It's lifted millions out of poverty, but the trend has been uneven and at risk of being reversed by the pandemic. We also have surging debt, surging inflation. Sri Lanka just defaulted. Pakistan, some say, may be at risk. Add to that, we also have a record heat wave, a sign of what's to come for a region that's very vulnerable to climate change. So what can be done? How do you mitigate all the challenges? What collective framework, policies, measures can be adopted to benefit from collective prosperity for a region that's traditionally been the least integrated in the world? I'm privileged to introduce to you Hari S. Bhartia, Jubilant Bhartia Group, founder and co-chairman, International Business Council. Rajan Anandan, Sequoia Capital, India Managing Director. Hina Ravini Kar, Minister, I apologize, Pakistan Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. Salman F. Rahman, Bangladesh Private Industry and Investment Advisor to the Prime Minister. First of all, I want to start with how to build a sustainable economy. Minister Salman Rahman, I want to start with you because Bangladesh at one point was called a basket case by an aide of Henry Kissinger. But it's seen tremendous growth over the course of 30 years, including during the pandemic when you saw 6% growth. Initially, it was about FDI going into your garments industry, but you've since done a lot better. You're going into power, you're going into agri. Talk to us about the key takeaway that the rest of the South Asian nations can replicate.
Thank you. Actually, the real growth which has taken place in Bangladesh has been this last 15 years, 14 to 15 years. That's when our Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, came to power for the second time. And she's been in power for, she's been re-elected for 2 terms. And what actually, I think the main key success of Bangladesh, the success story has been political stability. That we have, that has been the most important, I think, factor for our success. The other thing was that when Prime Minister Hasina came to power initially, we were in a very, very bad state as far as electricity was concerned. We were generating only 4,000 megawatt. And today we are generating something like nearly 25,000 megawatts. So, you know, she really put a lot of emphasis on electricity. 3 weeks ago, we achieved another milestone. Every single household in Bangladesh today has electricity. And then of course, as you mentioned rightly, our garment, and not only garment, textile. You see, we started with garment, but then we went into backward linkage. And today we have, there are many companies which are completely vertical. So we start with a bale of cotton and we end up with a shirt. So that the textile industry, huge investment went into it. And it wasn't all FDI. There was some FDI, but it was mostly domestic investment which actually let this growth go up. The other thing which was really, I think, you know, Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world. It's 170 million people size, Switzerland size. So imagine if we put 170 million people into Switzerland, what would happen? But we are self-sufficient in food, nearly self-sufficient in food. So our agriculture sector has been a tremendous success. We are the 4th largest producer of rice in the world. We are self-sufficient in rice. We are the 3rd largest producer of vegetables in the world. We are the 3rd largest producer of river sweetwater fish. We are self-sufficient in poultry. We are self-sufficient in egg, milk, all of this. So agriculture has really been a very, very successful. Even though we are a very small country, we don't have land, but in spite of that. So this was basically, and the other thing which in the pandemic we have been successful, and the reason why, the other thing which we did was, because we are a small country, our digital, Prime Minister went for digital Bangladesh, and we laid a fiber optic backbone up to the village level. So because of that, our IT sector has really, we are giving 4G connections at very low price, and our connectivity is very good. We are now going into 5G. So we have these freelancers. We have over 650,000 freelancers, young men and women who live from their own villages. They are able to, access the international marketplace. So all of these have actually, and then of course women empowerment. That has been really the major success story. And it started with the garment industry, because that's when the women started working in the garment industry. And that actually, because 50% of the population are women. And if you empowering the women is actually what moves the economy forward, and that's what we have actually seen has happened.
So multiple factors. Minister Hina Rabbani, I mean, Pakistan is under a lot of pressure economically, politically. How is the country looking at growth, and how is it looking at it in relation to the rest of the South Asian region? Because is it about getting additional aid? Because Jeffrey Sachs himself has said that it is about getting additional aid in his development model.
I mean, aid has never taken a country out of one place to a better place. I mean, I cannot really think of many examples where aid has been the primary driver of an economies or a people's potential being unleashed. And excuse me for being a little bit pessimistic on the aid architecture, because I have served as Pakistan's Minister for Economic Assistance, which means have looked at bilateral, multilateral aid assistance or aid packages, and its aid architecture is broken. So that's a side story which I'm not going to go into. But no, I think Pakistan's economy, we love to say, is an economy which has proven again and again its resilience, and that's not the best story that we have, right? Because you don't want to constantly test an economy or its people on the resilience front. However, Pakistan is currently obviously going through a difficult time on the economic front, simply because of the economic shocks. I think less because of internal compulsions and more because of the external economic shocks which have come from, one, the ongoing or the conflict which was on our borders for about 20 years. And that has obviously taken a toll. When you look into the numbers, it's billions of dollars, and the security focus that you have to have because of the spending you have is limited pie, and because you have to take spending out of health and education and put it on managing the border, which was a difficult border to manage. So having said all of that, currently there is the external shock of the international oil prices, which is really what is the driver of the current problem. The fiscal space which has contracted is because of that one particular external shock. And as we go forward, I think this government is committed to ensuring that we do the responsible thing. The moment the journey to that has already started, and as soon as that happens, I feel very strongly that we are also very keen to give the right signaling to areas or parts of the economy which have low-hanging fruit, which have potential to really grow very quickly and make Pakistan also grow. Agriculture certainly happens to be one of them. And Pakistan has the potential to be the breadbasket for the entire region and for parts of the world also, right? So all you have to do is the right signaling in terms of both prices and also giving the environment for that sector to be able to grow. What is currently very promising is also the IT sector, which has had an export growth which runs into hundreds of percentages because we start with a low base. But just because we start with a low base doesn't mean we cannot be very optimistic about it, because the potential for that to be unleashed with the right policies is immense. So there's the IT sector, there's the agriculture sector. Agriculture has traditionally been the backbone. And I think one thing that successive governments have not perhaps paid as much attention as they should have is in wanting to concentrate on other sectors, you don't leave a sector which is already doing very well, right? Which is potentially has great promise. So I think Pakistan will come out of your worrying list, as you attached us very comfortably with Sri Lanka. I would not think that would be the case at all. I think Pakistan, and by the way, I do want to say, because this thing goes around many places, oh, Sri Lanka and Pakistan going. If you look at the percentage of GDP, public debt as a percentage of GDP, there is no comparison. So people who look deeply into the numbers will understand how the comparisons don't hold. Pakistan is going through a blip right now, an economic blip, an economic difficult time, which is because of the external shocks. I think we have both the resilience and the ingredients within our people and the economy to be able to come out of it.
There are already two common themes there, agri as well as tech, and I will pick on that slightly later. Hari, let's get to you first. I mean, when it comes to India, we've seen massive growth, as much as 9% before the pandemic. Yet when you take a look at the social development ranking, India is among the worst in the South Asian countries. In fact, second only to Sri Lanka. Is there a need to reassess the growth strategy that India is adopting?
See, if you look at, you're absolutely right. In social indication, our numbers will be sometimes even compared to Bangladesh. It will be said that we are lower than even in Bangladesh and partly is because of the size of the population. I don't think we have been able to address the agricultural economy very effectively, in the sense that 70% of the people today are employed in the agricultural sector. Now, it's not sustainable at all, because it's only 15% of the economy. So if you don't bring them from agriculture to manufacturing or to services, we will not be able to improve a large part of the rural economy. But saying that, I think a lot of work has been done. If you look at last 15 years, subsidy going directly into the hands of people using digital power, and that is starting to change. Entrepreneurship at the grassroots level is starting to happen, because microfinance or funding is now available, which was not really the case in the past. So I am seeing a lot of change. If you go to the rural India, you see, while the numbers don't indicate it, but I see a change wherever you go. People are much more confident than what they used to be before, and if you look at the last 8 years of the present government, the amount of money, I'm just trying to think of the capital that has gone directly into the hands. Now that is very useful for the households. Is there anything?
So you think that's a game changer?
I think so. Because 80% of our subsidy would get lost when it comes to social sectors. And today, I think 60% is getting effective down to the grassroots level.
Rajan, when they talk about fighting poverty, they say that it's more about creating opportunities to share the wealth. If a woman is given a cow or a one-time payment of $500, she's able to multiply her wealth within a few years. How do you apply something like that? The principle of it, how do you share the wealth in a region like South Asia, create those opportunities?
Yeah, I think what you've seen, I think just to build on Hari's, the question that you asked Hari, I do think India has developed dramatically. I lived in the US for 20 years. My first stint in India was 94 to 96, right? And you compare India today, 2022 to 94, 96, it's just not comparable, right? 400 million Indians have come out of poverty. You look at any, measure of...
But still 150 million people below the poverty line.
No, I agree. But remember, we had 700 million, right? So it's all relative. There's only one nation in the history of the world that's pulled more people out of poverty in the last 30 years. That's China. So I agree with you. right? I think we've been through that comparison many times. So I think it's important that, it's all relative to where you've been, So now coming to your question, look, I think what we've seen really over the last 20 years is an explosive sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem that has still been confined in many ways to technology and technology-centric entrepreneurship, right? So, we have Vidit here from Meesho, we have Nikhil from Zerodha. These are all multi-billion-dollar companies, right? India, just to give you, and I'm going to get to how do you take, Sridevi, who lives in a very small village in Bihar, and how do you empower? I'll get to that in a minute. But if you go back to 2010, which was only 12 years ago, we had no unicorns, no billion-dollar private companies. We had about less than $1 billion of startup funding in that year. Now you fast forward 12 years, which is not a very long time. We just crossed 100 unicorns. We're the third largest ecosystem in the world. We have 69,000 startups, and these are sort of startups the way we would define it. They're new age companies that are technology-based and so on and so forth. And there's no question at this point in time that by 2030, we will get within striking distance of becoming the second largest, startup ecosystem in the world. So at a national level, in many ways, entrepreneurship has become a mission, right? And it's sort of, and by the way, what very few people understand is China today, the digital ecosystem in China employs 200 million people. India's mandate for jobs is 100 million people. Over the next 7-8 years, we have to create 100 million jobs, right? So if we just play out the digital economy the way it is and continue to build on it, we will create 100 million at least jobs, right? Because we'll be at least half as big as the Chinese internet economy. Now, now directly going to your question, what we have seen when I was at Google. So before I joined Sequoia, I spent 8 years at Google. One of the initiatives that we launched was called Internet Sati. What we did was we wanted to bring women in. We wanted to help women in rural India understand the power of the internet. So we deployed this massive initiative we touched 100,000 women in rural India from very small villages, exactly the kind of, Indian women you're talking about, and where we wanted to help them understand the power of the internet. What was remarkable to see is once these women understood how to use a smartphone, how to get connected to the internet, understood the power of the internet, they actually started using the internet to make a better living. It could be that they would improve their farming practices, or they would start a hair salon in their village, or they would actually start making things that they could sell. So I think the ability to create, can we uplift, as you said, let's say there's 100 million, 150 million, but let's just call it 600 million Indians, okay? Can we dramatically change the livelihoods of 600 million Indians, not through, by creating the next 900 unicorns, because, that will also happen, but by enabling them and empowering them to use technology and opportunity and upskilling to improve their lives? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. And we're beginning to see it. We're beginning to see it. And actually, many of our startups now, agri-tech is one of our most exciting sectors. And a lot of our agri-tech companies, what they're really doing is providing solutions to uplift the livelihoods of farmers.
I like that there's a common theme. Everybody has touched on how technology can be the solution. You talk about lifting 600 million, but how collectively, what policies, what framework, what measures can South Asia collectively adopt so that you have the competitive edge as a region? Because right now, it's pretty disparate. I mean, the region is not developing, growing at the same pace, and you're not capitalizing on the potential. What can be done in terms of policies, Minister?
You see, unfortunately, in South Asia, the biggest, we started with SAARC, which was the South Asian Regional Cooperation Organization, but that never took off. Unfortunately, we had the political issues, mainly it is between India and Pakistan. Until I think this is not resolved politically, the integration as a region which we are looking for is, and I agree with you, the potential is huge, but unless there is political will to integrate the region, that's not going to happen. I will give an example that in our side, Bangladesh, we are doing regional cooperation between Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And in that side, we are seeing a lot of With India already, we have power sharing agreements, we have transit agreements, we are buying whenever, during the peak time, we import power from India. At times, we export power to India. We are now seriously looking at developing hydropower in Nepal and having a common grid between Nepal, India, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, whereby we can, because, you know, again, climate change is a big issue. And hydropower is one of the, I think, best renewables and most green, you know, it's really green renewable. So we are doing, at that end, we are doing it. But actually, for integrating the whole region, and it's not also only Pakistan and India, there's also Afghanistan, which is part of South Asia. And there again, we have serious issues. So I think if we could get past this, the political differences, and really integrate the region, I personally feel that the potential for South Asia to overtake China is there. The, you know, the resources which are there within South Asia, the human resources, but that has really has to be done. And I'll just answer another question which you asked about uplifting the people out of poverty, which we have been very successful doing in Bangladesh. And you know that our HDI indexes, you know, in all of South Asia, we have the lowest infant mortality. We have the highest life expectancy. So it's not only economic development that has taken place. Our development has actually been inclusive. And there what we need to do actually is to create an enabling environment. What Anand said is completely right. You know, all you have to do, the individual is very smart. All you have to do is create the enabling environment. You give the woman the smartphone. Once she knows how to use it, then the sky is the limit as far as she's concerned. And that's exactly what, in Bangladesh at least, we have seen that. Our mobile phone penetration is 1.6. That is because more than, you know, people have more than 2 phones in Bangladesh. So all of that, and technology, of course, is the future.
Minister Hinarabani, I mean, why can't it be a case where you get economic prosperity and that helps you overcome the trust deficit? I mean, why does it have to be a case of putting behind your politics, resolving your political differences first before economics can be accelerated? I mean, why can't it be the other way around? Achieve economic prosperity as a region and then overcome that trust deficit.
Yeah, I think we tried to start that journey at least 10 years back, and then before that many times, and every time we start that journey, something or the other happens. And recently, at the cost of being slightly recently what has happened is that one very important country, which was known for its secular credentials, etc., decided to go a little bit problematic, yeah, on that front. And now, even if you ignore that, look, the reality, there can be wishes and there can be the reality. And on the reality, we can want to be optimistic, and I am a big optimist, but I also have to be pragmatic about the fact, because I'm not that old. Even I'm tired of the same words being repeated and the same dreams being dreamed again and again, and then the reality hitting you, right? The fact of the matter is that the country which is our neighbor, which does exceptionally well on intra-regional trade, 1.7% to 3%. I'm talking intra-regional, India, with all of South Asia, right? So it's not, our ecosystem has not been developed to trade regionally. We all rather export to faraway lands in Europe and Americas, and then almost act as if we don't live where we live. It's almost like we are ignoring geography and wanting to discard the reality of where we are placed or our geography. And that has been very costly. Anyone who wants to congratulate, all of us can congratulate ourselves on various things that the countries might have done better. But when the British came to the subcontinent, 25% of the world GDP was from the subcontinent. Are we at that place now? How much are we contributing to the world GDP? So the potential in where we are, I feel, has been absolutely curtailed because of the fact that we have been unable to unleash ourselves or to separate ourselves from our history. And the history was bad. But does the future have to be hostage to a bad history? And every time we try and break away from that, we are taken back to right where we started, and perhaps a few years back or a few decades back. So it's really, I still want to be exceptionally optimistic about it, but if you look at the reality of SAARC, it has been, you cannot even do a summit, because if Pakistan has to host it, India will try and make sure it doesn't happen, and vice versa, perhaps, right? So I think it's really important to see things for what they are, and to then imagine a world, or start working towards a world, because all of us believe that we are in this fantastically important geostrategic location. Now, with very big walls on each of that, or of our borders, we don't really assist our cause in being integrated. And integration, regional integration within this will have massive benefit. I do want to just take one more minute of yours, because what you started off asking everybody else and did not ask me was perhaps the one area where Pakistan has done brilliantly, which is women, empowerment, inclusion, all three themes, and poverty. And dealing with poverty head on, because you realize that yes, your growth numbers were kicking in, but people were getting poor, and people were not really feeling part. So we created this platform called the Benazir Income Support Program 10 years back, and luckily, happy to report, every successive government, they might have played with the nomenclature, decided to take that highway, which was built for the poor, on which various other things that were then added on, such as health insurance, etc. But this highway, now interestingly, it said that the money in the household would go to the women, and it would go through bank accounts. And now that's being digitalized. So that has now given you literally a way to protect the poor, whether it was COVID, whether it was any other event, and also the state the comfort that a certain number of people who are below a certain line are always getting extra protection. I mean, that's a brilliant story that is out of Pakistan, which is replicable.
I want to pick up on the ecosystems. Can the private sector build that ecosystem that the government can't build? I mean, can the private sector, well, the private sector, of course it can, but can the private sector take the lead?
You know, I visited Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and, you know, I speak Bengali fluently. I'm born and brought up in Calcutta. So we are one, firstly, we are one culture. Our songs are, you know, whether it's Runa Laila's songs is famous in India, and the Sufi songs from Pakistan are part of Bollywood, and I'm sure the Bollywood songs are part of the culture in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So we eat the same kind of food, and when you go and visit as business to business, as people to people, there is no conflict. People, and I don't want to get into politics of being secular or not being secular, but people to people, there's great love. Whether it is whichever religion, India has a large population of Muslim people, and so we don't differentiate. You know, when I go to Pakistan, I can almost speak in Urdu because living in Delhi. So there is a great interest from businesses to trade with each other. But we are not allowed to invest. If I want to invest in Pakistan, there is no way I can do it. And I'm sure if we are invested in each other's countries, then there will be a reason to make sure that we have peace. We have invested in Bangladesh as a group, and when I go there, I feel that I'm in India. I don't see any difference, and I think our relationship is prospering. And I think if you look at pharmaceuticals or many areas, you talked about power, sharing of power. So definitely private sector can play a role, but politics have to decide whether they allow us to operate or not. I think that's the issue. I'm not a politician at the end of the day, but we work with them. I've been part of India-Pakistan trying to do the parallel dialogue on how we can start to trade. As you rightly said, Minister, that many times it's almost we felt the borders are going to open, and then something happens. and then we back to square one. So that's the challenge. But you are absolutely right. We have one culture. So whatever we develop, a startup which happens in India is equally valid to do the same platform to run it in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or India. So I don't see any difference. The markets are same, the food is same, the apparel is same. So whatever you sell in India or you sell in Pakistan, you can sell in all parts of South Asia. So I feel private sector has a role to play, but politics must allow us to do it.
Rajan?
Yeah, I think, look, I agree with everything that's been said. I do think before, we talk a lot about collaboration across countries, right? The reality is, if you look at three big countries, you look at India, you look at Pakistan, you look at Bangladesh, right? 160, 170 million people, 260 million people, and 1.4 billion people. I think the first step, as you said, which is, and then Sri Lanka, which is 22 million people, and then you have Nepal and so on. I think the first thing is, you have to get those countries in shape, right? Political stability, Minister, you had mentioned this, is the most important. If you don't have political stability, it's very difficult to have great relationships across countries, right? If you have political stability, you have progressive policies, the private sector in those nations happens. You can look at the 180 plus countries around the world. The nations that have political stability and progressive policies actually do develop over a period of time. So I think as South Asia, and that's I think what you've seen in Bangladesh, where I was telling Minister that we made our first investment in Bangladesh 3 years ago, and as my partner Mohit knows, we're big fans of Bangladesh. Why? Because you have political stability, you have a GDP per capita that is accelerating now, is actually higher than India, because of political stability and progressive policy. So I think the first thing as a region, right, you can't really have this extraordinary collaboration across countries if you don't have political stability. So I think political stability in the nations, first step, I think once you have that in the nations, you have to have progressive policy. So for instance, in each of our countries, there's so much we can learn on policies, right? So let's take the unique ID project. India today has digital ID for every Indian. It's open source. So any country in the world today can actually implement digital ID for their own nation, anywhere in the world. It's open sourced. Right, and we are seeing some countries now beginning to do that, right? You look at Bangladesh and see how do you open up an apparel sector or any manufacturing sector to compete with the best in the world. We should learn from that as India, right? Or let's take Pakistan. Interestingly, Pakistan, Minister, I'm sure you know this, is one of the most progressive financial sector reforms, right? These new banking licenses you're going to issue. So I think there's a lot we can learn and implement in our own countries. And I think as hopefully we see political stability across our nations, I think we will see more collaboration, which in many ways I see that as the accelerator, not where you start. So you can't start accelerating a region when there's political instability in some of your most important nations, right? I mean, I think that's sort of shown itself many, many times.
Before we continue the discussion, are there questions from the floor? Because that's the style we're having. It's interactive. If you have a question, do raise your hand and we'll direct a mic to you.
No questions.
Please.
No questions.
Thank you very much for quality discussion. I can learn a lot. I'm running my private equity fund management company in Japan, mainly a buyout investment in Japan and in Asia. So I'd like to specifically ask Mr. Anandan. We are now thinking about to start growth capital fund, investment type of fund, mainly for India and other Southeast Asian countries. But at the same time, a lot of companies' directors advise me that they do not have any experience to get really money back. So, Taisuke is my name. Really be careful to do like minority investment there. So, would you give us some advice on why those kind of tragedies or happens, and how can we overcome those pitfalls?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So we are actually in the early, we are in the venture capital business, not in the private equity business. But if you look at India and the private equity asset class, over the last 6 to 7 years, we've returned an extraordinary amount of capital back to international, back to limited partners. I'm talking about the private equity sector. And even in the venture capital space, that's beginning to happen. The way I think about doing anything in India is being tourists is a recipe for getting wiped out. Right? So if you're going to do business in India, and I'm assuming the same thing is true in Bangladesh or Pakistan or any of these places, you actually have to become reasonably local. And I think we've seen that, firms that build local teams with very strong local experience, who understand the local culture, who understand how to make investments, locally actually have done very well. So I would say, if you go back maybe 6 or 7 years ago, what you said was true. I think India didn't have a record of exits in the private equity business. I'm talking about late stage private equity, which I think is where you are. But that has actually changed pretty significantly. I think, in fact, I heard what the Carlyle founder actually talking about this, saying India is in one of their top 2 private equity returns markets over the last 5 years. So I don't know whether that's helpful.
Please.
So when you do come, though, make sure you build a local team.
Question.
Hi, Ravi Agrawal with Foreign Policy Magazine. My question's for Minister Hina Rabbani-Kar. We've skirted over the issues of political instability. Obviously, your country has had its fair share of that over the last few years. But what we didn't quite get to was China. And I'm curious, given your role, whether you think that Pakistan's closeness to China, and on the other hand, India's recent shift in its foreign policy strategy, where it's focused more now, I think, on China than it is on Pakistan, opens a window for Pakistan to be able to focus a little bit more on trade and other regional ties and issues that have been on the back burner, as maybe India's not as focused on its sort of military or other forms of rivalry with Pakistan.
Okay, let me try and get this right. Are you saying India is now less focused on its rivalry and
Yes.
military antagonism towards Pakistan because it has now turned towards China?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Well, first of all, do you even agree with the premise? My sense of it would be the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
It provides some evidence for that. But then also, what can Pakistan do to try again now that you have a new government?
Okay, sure. Okay, first of all, I look at China as obviously an immediate neighbor to Pakistan, and so certainly part of our region, but I also look at China as part of the broader region that we all belong to. And I would not celebrate India's antagonism towards China as much as, pretty much in the same way that I would not celebrate, any of our antagonism towards anyone else at all. I think it has repercussions and ramifications which go into decades. So you can make some wrong choices or wrong decisions in split seconds, and the ramifications, we witnessed it in Afghanistan. And you can't then roll back. You cannot suddenly say, oh, now I want to be friends, and now we want to be friendly, and now let's all get together. It doesn't happen like that. Now, having said that, look, I didn't want to really go into this because this is an economic debate, but it's the elephant in the room. We can't ignore it. I find this particularly interesting because as someone and as a party which decided to take a lot of political hit to undo what happened post-1965, where no government of any type in Pakistan thought it was wise to normalize trade relations with India because there was a very high political cost, unless we found a resolution to the Kashmir conflict, right? And we went ahead and we said, no, let's try and normalize things and start treating each other as human beings, as normal people, as people who are, first of all, human beings which are very similar in every way. Culturally, we look alike, we speak sometimes the same, at least the script might be different. We eat similar food, we pretty much are very similar. But we have this huge divide on the basis of the inherited disputes. And then we decided, whether it was India or Pakistan, but pretty much many decades on, instead of reducing that basket and taking some of those problems that we inherited in our partition and reducing we decided to pile onto that basket, right? Siachen was piled on. They will say another, and we can all argue this till. Now we keep on doing that, and we still think, despite all of that, okay, time to break free and time to just really start normalizing, so we can then move to resolving the dispute, because the disputes, believe me, will need to be resolved in order to enable this environment to be a peaceful environment, a normal environment. You cannot have something which is within this again, I don't, within the Security Council, recognize dispute and say, no, this is a unilateral issue. It doesn't happen like that, right? You cannot wish a reality away. But we said, okay, let's reach that resolution of disputes, but let's normalize. Now, unfortunately, as I was saying earlier, the events of the last 2-3 years of what has happened in legally Indian occupied Kashmir cannot be looked the other way, because that is almost conflagrating an already difficult situation. So then we come to this difficult place that, are you willing to step back so we can step forward? And if you're not, then what signals are you sending to everyone? That every time you try and normalize, we will then do something which is even more conflagratory than what we did before? Now, all of this has reputational hazard, because then, as someone who wants to go and sell this to Pakistan, we're told, look, last time you decided to do this, look at what happened. The situation got even worse. So I really look at it as the inheritors of problem. And as my generation has lived through this, but I was born post-1971. Okay, the current foreign minister of Pakistan was even born much later than that, 10 years, I think, later. Yeah, more, maybe later than that. Now, we have a young generation of people who have not inherited the memories of partition, the memories of wars. Yet you want to be able to go to the next plane, but you have to we all have to enable that together in some ways. But if you start piling on more problems, then you're disabling people who want to say, okay, let's move on. Okay, so it's exceptionally important that we are able to view this as unleashing the potential for all of us and for the poor. I mean, we tend to be host to one of the largest populations of poverty, and then want to congratulate ourselves of the little successes. I don't really see it that way. So there is potential to absolutely move forward, but we cannot be delusional about the reality, right? You cannot undo what is. So let's start the journey of showing, some movement on recognizing what the problem is, and normalizing would absolutely be the way forward. But then if you create more problems as you start the journey of normalizing, then your intentions are rightfully doubted in many quarters.
Hari, you wanted to add?
Minister, my feeling whenever I visited Pakistan, there is no divide among people. Mm-hmm. I have good friends,
yes.
And if you talk to them and you stay in their homes, I don't see at people-to-people level there is a huge divide. I have never felt it. Whenever I visited, maybe 5 or 6 times, and a lot of my friends have come here, mainly in business, and I watched cricket there, and we were welcome even in the stadium wherever we went. So if we don't have people-to-people divide, we have a dispute at political level. Why can't we park it but continue to build, which is beneficial to both the countries? Trade is not beneficial to India or Pakistan. I think it's benefit to both. So can we not build that part? And hopefully that will help in the political resolution in the future. Look at post-World War II. Mm-hmm. France, Germany, England, they all work together. Look at the power of European Union today.
Absolutely.
So there must be some way.
Interestingly, you're preaching to the convert on this particular one, but Let me just say this very quickly, because I know you're running out of time, that all of that held true, and then you do August 5th. Okay? So the message that one sees on the other side is that a country which is much larger will suddenly feel that it can send jets into your country, and it can then take an issue which was already unresolved, which has Security Council resolutions, and then do something in it which will go against the bilateral commitments and commitments to the international community and Security Council resolutions. So then we start feeling, and I know, because this is, I didn't want this session to become that, then we will start feeling that we're living in the neighborhood of a rogue state, right? And that as a smaller state, and not only that, look, you may underestimate the importance of the rights of the Kashmiri people, the international law has provided them those rights, right? So for one state, for your state or mine, it's not within our control. We don't have, under international law, we don't have the right to be dismissive about it. So this is, so what you are propagating and giving as the way forward is exactly what we did. And that's exactly the point, that it's therefore important that we keep on going. Once we start a journey, we don't then put, problematic
we are
features
quickly
on it.
running out of time.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we are out of time. But before we wrap it up, I just want one question to be answered by all the speakers right now. I mean, we talk about how the region can be more integrated. I mean, just in terms of trade, it's only, 5% versus Southeast Asia, which is 25%. And the potential for trade, I don't know, 20 billion right now. The potential is 70 billion. What is the one step, one practical step that can be taken almost immediately to try and better the situation and let South Asia have realized that potential? Minister, we won't start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Look, so the way I think about trade for our region is the combined GDP of South Asia is about $3.5 trillion. The combined global GDP is over $80 trillion, right? We have 5,000 years of entrepreneurship. And what is at play and at stake is an $80 trillion global market. If you look at India today, right, the month of April, if you look at the investments that were made, call it between 500,000 and 5 million, 67% of our new companies are from India targeting the world, right? So, and I think we need to see the same thing. So we absolutely should do more trade, but I think that's thinking too small. Because we have 5,000 years of entrepreneurship history. We have, without question, the smartest technical talent in the world. By the way, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's India, whether it's Bangladesh.
But what is the one step, one practical step
It's
or measure?
entrepreneurship. It is mainstream entrepreneurship. Take the gloves off. Entrepreneurship. The gloves can be kept in other areas if so decided to be. But I would say the one thing is just let's unleash innovation and entrepreneurship in South Asia, and let's unleash it on the world.
Just one step is open the borders for people to travel between countries, like what we see in Europe. May not be to that level, but even today, to get a visa to go into Pakistan is impossible, or for Pakistanis to come into India is impossible. So there's no people-to-people movement. Even as tourists, trade will happen, and collaboration will happen, but there must be movement.
Minister?
Okay, again, don't want to give a long answer, but as someone who happily went to India and we signed the visa agreement, open trade with India, and then had to roll back everything. So the 70-year-old answer is, let's resolve the Kashmir conflict so the elephant in the room disappears and we are able to look at each other as normal people and not one which are impeded by a situation that can conflagrate any time. And I just want to say the last line on this being that this is not something that is a good that we'll be kind enough to give to them. Right? This is a Security Council given right to the Kashmiri people. So it is just accepting reality as it exists and say we will not each be. I will say about Pakistan, that Pakistan will not be a rogue state on that commitment given to the Kashmiri people, and India will not be a rogue state on the commitment given to the Kashmiri people. It's been the elephant in the room for the last 70 years, so the answer to me is a single word answer.
Minister?
Well, I mentioned when you asked the question, I said that for integration to take place and for trade to increase, the dispute between India and Pakistan has to be resolved.
So you
for
agree
total integration. It has to be resolved. I don't agree with necessarily agree with the points which you have, because that would be, from the Indian side, there would be, I think, they would counter what you have to say. I'm sure they have their arguments. I'm neither either this way or that way. My point is,
very clear on that.
My point is that until and unless the Pakistan and India dispute is not resolved, integration within South Asia the kind of integration you're talking about, increasing trade and talking, is not possible. So what have we done in Bangladesh? We have said that, okay, let them continue to fight. Let us try to integrate as much as we can with the remaining countries. And that's how we are going forward. And we find that we have definitely benefited from that.
Absolutely.
I guess we're taking stock in January when we meet again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Insightful, candid. Thank you.